Okay, my name is Alessandra Cavalli. I am closing the 2.5 days. And what I'm going to say will resonate because many of you have said things that were already here. So let's see. So the title of my presentation is Continuous Becoming, or the Experience of Becoming into Being. When the egg and the sperm meet and the fertilized egg falls into the fallopian tube, into the uterus, according to the French child analyst Françoise Dolto, an unconscious desire to be born into life and a new drive towards consciousness is actualized. The human seed is anchoring itself in the fertile earth of the mother. There, everything needed for life can be found. From inside the uterus, the fetus grows attached to the mother through a link of life, the umbilical cord, that guarantees survival. The seed grows and unfolds rapidly. At 3 months of gestation, the fetus is able of listening to everything outside. Mother's and father's voices are recognized. Noises are identified and heard. Soon the fetus begins to dance to the sound he hears. He attunes himself to the sound of mother's voice, choosing different movements. He might move the right leg every time he hears a "ah" sound, or the left leg every time he hears a "i" sound. This dance makes him feel connected to the mysteries of a world that he does not know yet, but is preparing for. The unborn baby has a great need for connectedness. He is able of synchronizing his heartbeat to the mother's heartbeat. In this way, he begins to learn about his mother inside out. Her peace of mind, her depressive states, her anxieties. Through the different frequency of her heartbeat, the fetus begins to gain a pretty unconscious knowledge of her state of mind, of her thoughts. While he explores the world in which he lives, he slowly begins to become aware of how much the world in which he lives is linked to the world outside. Using his resources and his newly acquired knowledge based on his experiences in the uterus, he might be imagining something about the other world outside. Will they also dance in water like him? While inside the uterus it is very loud, heartbeat, digestion, bowels movement, he knows that in that other world, outside, there are many rhythms, silences, talking, moving, posing, full of intensity, softness, loud. The fetus unconsciously knows that he's preparing for that journey. One day he will go there. So to that world he knows little about. The journey the fetus has to undergo is difficult. He has to abandon his ordered world. He has to let go and face the unknown, the chaos of the unknown. It is a tremendous step into the void. There is much more continuity between intrauterine life and earliest infancy than the impressive caesura of the act of birth allows us to believe, says Freud. Nevertheless, in the caesura lies the secret of development. At each caesura in life, we grow, we transform ourselves, we become into being, we actualize our potential, we transcend the being we were to become a bit more what we are meant to become. In the depth of the undeveloped mind of the fetus, there is a preconception, an archetypal predisposition, a sort of grammar of the psyche that guides the newborn baby into chaos, into the unknown, how to move, what to search for. I will show a sequence of a baby crawling into the world outside the womb. So the meeting the mother and the breast and descending into chaos.
One of the most incredible observations made recently is that if you place the infant or newborn right on the mother's abdomen, just beneath her chest, the baby has a whole sequence where it will crawl on its own, given enough time, right to the breast. This probably evolved over 400,000 years ago, and it was essential for survival when the mother delivered, often by herself or with another woman. The baby was equipped to find the nipple and begin to suckle. And when this baby suckled, it would stimulate in the mother an increased milk production a day or two later, but it would also stimulate oxytocin into the bloodstream, which would go down into the uterus, clamping the uterus down, pushing out the placenta, and stop any bleeding.
The following series of photographs, shot during a 45-minute period immediately following Andrew's birth, documents an astonishing feat of maneuvering and self-attaching to the breast. First described by Swedish investigators, it was dubbed the breast crawl. Andrew was placed midline on his mother's chest at 10 minutes old and rests. He has been fully dried after birth, but the vitamin K, eye ointment, and bath have been delayed for 1 hour. He begins to suckle vigorously on his hand and fist. He opens his mouth, keeping an eye on the left nipple, and continues to lift his upper body. He lifts himself even more and bobs his head while pulling himself upward. He makes stepping motions with his feet under the blanket. This puts pressure on his mother's abdomen and stimulates uterine contractions to decrease bleeding. His mother also lets his feet push against her hands for support. He looks back at the left nipple. Andrew has completely moved over to the right breast now, mouthing the nipple and looking towards his mother and is resting. He returns to sucking his thumb, retrieving the smell and taste of the familiar amniotic fluid that he drank in utero. When a baby's hands are washed shortly after birth, a great deal of mouthing activity on the hands is lost. These familiar smells and tastes may be one way he guides himself to the breast, since a mother's breast excretes a substance similar to one found in the amniotic fluid. Andrew is using his hand and mouth, readying himself for good placement. Notice how high he lifts himself to see her, and at the same time to get the most effective placement of his lips on the areola rather than the nipple. As he gazes at his mother, Andrew is developing a memory for her face. Here he raises himself up, continues to gaze, opening his mouth wide enough to make a perfect placement. In their mutual gaze, Andrew's mother almost instinctively opens her mouth in response.
We managed. So, if the birth is the first caesura in the life of an infant, I will now investigate 3 further caesura that the infant has to overcome, 3 jumps into unknown and chaos that he needs to allow himself doing in the next years of life. I will use 3 paintings for us to picture how the journey of the infant is developing. The scope of this talk is to show that there is much more continuity between infancy and mature life than the impressive caesura of the end of infancy allows us to believe, to paraphrase Freud. The motive of Sainte Anne, the Virgin Mary and the Child, and the way it is depicted in history of art, seems to describe very well and in a powerful way what the scope of development in childhood is. It's there. This is Masaccio, Uffizi 1424. Sainte Anne represents the support of the family for the newborn baby. So, picture one, we will see how in the history of art this motive changes, and meanwhile how the relations baby-mother changes. So, beginning of ordering of chaos, from pre-verbal to verbal, from confusion to order, from unconscious to conscious. Scenario one, a hungry baby hallucinates the breast. The attuned mother, as we have seen, knows that her baby is hungry, and she intuitively knows what her baby needs. As a result of her imaginative work, the baby experiences a realization of its own hallucination. In the sense, the baby knew he was looking for something. Everything arrives in just the right way. There is a sense of fit between the baby anticipation and realization. This mother helps the baby to feel that chaos is tolerable. Scenario two. If the mother is less in tune with her baby, maybe she's less confident in herself. She cannot imagine what she could do, and her actions are less responsive. So she might be more mechanical, less attentive, less in tune with her baby. In this second scenario, the breast presents itself to the baby as an alien object. While baby one is not afraid of the unknown, baby two feels threatened by unknown and finds it much more difficult to open up to it. This scenario might become so traumatic that baby two might close himself to chaos and decide to stay in his very little but known environment. In this case, growth is crippled and the seed will never come to maturation. In scenario one, the baby feels he has created the breast. He might be thinking, I have created the world, or the world is responsive to me. I can transform it. I can transform into life what I have imagined. Clearly, the baby does not think in this way, but events of this kind underpin creativity. Only when self-experience is reflected does the baby feel full alive. As he praises the world, he gives voice to his own feeling self that he feels reflected in the form of the world, beginning by his mother's face. By doing so, he transforms the world while he is transformed. The mother's responses are like an echo. Before birth, the infant lives inside a mother's space. After birth, a mother creates with her body, her arms, her breast, her warmth and attention, a near uterine state for her infant. It could be called a marsupial space, a space of transition between the total dependence in the womb and the increasing independence of separate existence. For the first few months of extrauterine life, the infant's physical space is largely the same as the mother's physical space. As the baby grows and develops in terms of mobility and independence, he gradually emerges from the pouch of mother's orbit, and his personal space becomes increasingly defined by his relationship with the general space of the wider world. As this happens, the infant's internal space begins to be formed, with the mind capable of thinking, observing, facing chaos, together with the sense of a core self, that we could call the personality of the infant with his own sense of identity. Picture 2, 1503, Leonardo da Vinci, National Gallery. Moving away from the known marsupial space, exploring the unknown, the space between mother and infant. The physical and psychological separation between mother and infant creates a space between mother and infant, and in the infant's experience, which is the rudimentary space for consciousness. The experience of separation as a painful absence is a necessary developmental aspect in the growth of consciousness. The suffering of an actual space in which the mother is absent is the necessary condition for the development of representational symbol. The first thought is the thought of an absence. No mother. There thinking begins. Creativity begins where the absence has been acknowledged. When the infant reaches the stage of recognizing the loved mother as not created by the infant, but as a person in her own right, the question arises, how to survive without her? Here the problem of creativity becomes important. I give you a little vignette. Leah, 2 years old. Her mother calls Leah and asks her to help mother with a puzzle. Leah goes to mother and does the puzzle very quickly. There are 5 pieces. She succeeds in putting 4 pieces together, but the 5th doesn't fit. Leah becomes very agitated, cries, stands up, falls, bangs her head, looks outside the window and seems lost. She then sees her ballerina outfit, puts it on with her father's help, and starts dancing. Her father puts a record on, and they both dance. Mother gets a Polaroid camera and takes a picture of Leah. As soon as the picture is developed, Mother shows it to Leah, who looks at herself, opens her mouth, and tries to swallow the image of herself on the picture. After that, Leah has a look at the puzzle. She goes straight to the piece she couldn't place before, picks it up, and is now able to put it in the right place. In this vignette, Leah seems to be reconnected in a primitive, physical way to a good experience of herself. She eats, the Leah who was having a good experience. As we see after this, she has regained the self-confidence that she had briefly lost. We might speculate that she needs to take inside herself, to swallow, an image of herself who is loved. Leah seems to connect with a previous internalized experience of taking in something good. This previous experience must already be inside. This concept of inside begins to be formed by the infant taking in mother's milk, her voice, her look. The experience of something going inside must be responsible for the beginning of differentiation between inside and outside. By eating the good image of herself, Leah seems able to identify with the good mother who is feeding her with something good. In the transition between feeling capable and losing that sense of a capable self, Leah searches for a confirmation that she can do alone. She still needs help to refine this confirmation, but once she feels secure in herself, she can continue to solve problems with a sense of agency. Leah seems to have achieved some capacity for symbolization. She's not eating food in order to make herself feel well, for example, but she eats in pretend a lovely image of herself. In this way, Leah is strengthening her ego and her identity. The capacity to relinquish the mother will foster the development of language. In the absence of mother, I can call her, I can express my needs, I can think my own thought, I can grow, become independent. This is a very difficult moment, the caesura between letting go of the marsupial space and acquiring the capacity to become separate, able to know one's own emotions, needs, and desire, and learn how to express them. The incapacity to manage this transition has terrible consequences for the developing child. He remains trapped in the fantasy of living in the womb, which is order, which is known. Chaos, unknown, remains unmanageable, and with it, creation, creativity, expansion, and discovery. The child needs to go on creating what is unknown, what is chaos, the same way he did it after birth. Go on figuring out, finding ways of representing what is unknown and chaotic. This is the capacity of the artist, the infant that goes on discovering the world. Picture 3, Caravaggio 1606 in Villa Borghese, becoming a person in one's own right. Discovering the world around us and the role of the father. In this phase, the mother has to let go of her child, allow him to become separate, allow him to develop his own potency, to do what he can do, discover what he can discover. So the child is going to go away from mother, discover, observe, give up the illusion that he possesses mother, that he has created her. Mother becomes part of the order that the child has created inside himself. His task is to continue his journey of creation, to be reborn again into new chaos, unknown, and represent it, order it, master it, in order to go on creating, representing, ordering, always at the limit between known and unknown, as this child seems to show. Rikako, 2 years old, came to a worm on the road in a paddle and stopped what she was doing. All 3 children gathered around to look at the worm, which was alive and moving. Rikako moved forwards to stamp on the worm, but father stopped her. Rikako bent down to try to pick the worm, but father took her hand and said no. There was a drain cover nearby, and the 3 children gathered around the drain cover to look down into the water. Rikako suddenly stopped, pointed up at the sky, saying, "Bird." Father looked up but couldn't see any bird. We looked carefully at the trees and the sky for some time as Rikako pointed at them, and we saw a bird in the tree above our heads. Then Rikako spotted a squirrel and pointed fascinated as she watched the squirrel swinging from one tree to the next. The other 2 children were moving on along the path, but Rikako didn't seem to notice them much and seemed in a separate space. Then they came over to her, and one of them pushed Rikako quite hard, so she almost fell over. But regaining her balance just in time, Rikako looked bemused and didn't retaliate. The father of that child said something, so the little girl bent over to Rikako and hugged her. They kissed. The other child did not want to be left out, so they joined the 2 in a tripartite, rather unstable hug. It was time to go, so we walked slowly back with several distractions, such as another worm and another large muddy puddle, which Rikako splashed in. The role of the father becomes very important here. He points out to the child the future, the unknown. The task, go and explore. Orangutans do this in a very clear-cut way. Once their offspring are ready, more or less 1 year after birth, and have learned everything from their mothers, fathers fight against them and send them away. They want their wives back. It is now the task of the young orangutans to go in search of their own wives. For humans, the process is much more complex. The work of the father is to push the child to move on, to go on experiencing the world, to study, to find out whom he is, and leave the world of the mother behind, go into the unknown yet again. From lived meaning to representational form. The child has now to find ways of creating for himself objects or forms that help him containing experiences, playing with a doll and loving it, writing a poem, creating a hut in the trees. Eurydice has to be lost forever. Orpheus begins to sing and creates a form in which he can contain his feeling of sadness when she's lost. The infant needs to appropriate words now, words which are understood by everybody, but represent for him, at best, his own experience. Lorenzo, 4 years old, has to start school the next day and is afraid. He does not know how to do it. First, he sits on the couch, jumping up and down, maybe as a way of expressing his confusion and anxieties. Then he sits on and transforms the couch into a car. He's now driving the car, and with his mouth, he makes the sound of a sport car. He's driving very fast on top of things. So I say, now that you can drive the car, it will be easy to go to school tomorrow. He was showing me in pretend that he is a potent boy, creating a language. Alfie, 8 years old, a black boy who has been bullied, asked me, "Do you think that color-blind people might not be racist? They might not see the color of the skin." Finding a form. Maria, 11, who suffers from multiple traumas, brings Play-Doh to her session and creates a sort of breast without a nipple. Instead of the nipple, there is a hole. Together we understand how terrifying it is to live inside that hole, an empty hole without a mother. These children were representing for me in a creative way a very charged emotional experience that seemed chaotic to them. By giving it a form, we were able to give voice to it so that the experience could become known, ordered, and helpfully a way of handling it could emerge. The journey of the hero. Every human being has to create their own life by being and becoming all the time, moving into future in the same way the fetus moved out of a known space into chaos and the unknown. Like the baby who creates his mother, the human creates his future by opening up to the unknown, finding a form for it, creating a language, and giving it meaning. Being and becoming means sacrifice. What you already are, for whom you could become. Like the fetus who has to move out into the unknown and is guided by an internal knowledge that pushes him to go in search for what is needed. Like Leah, who stops and reminds herself that she is capable, that she has already overcome obstacles and has to try again and again. Like Rikako, who openly explores the unknown, discovering the beauty of nature and its ugliness, including the other children's attacks. Each of us, day by day, have to repeat this pattern, the pattern of life. The child, like the artist, lives in a space which we could call chaos, order, chaos, similar to the space between womb and extrauterine life. In order to go on developing, we need to investigate that link, that caesura, to approach it by knowing beforehand is here of no use. Unfortunately, those who have suffered multiple trauma and have lost a possible link to their internal guide are in danger of remaining trapped in horrible wombs, which, by promising order, protect from pain, chaos, and growth. The price to pay for this protection is life itself, as those wombs are deadly, like hell. Life is always outside, where future is. The artist has to find the courage to be born again and again. And here I am.